But we begin at the very top of our international list. More heat for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who may be overplaying his hand, according to many insiders. First, the pictures. This is what is going on in East Jerusalem today, as Netanyahu insists that he has the right to build more Israeli settlements in the disputed land. The militant group Hamas declared a day of rage. This is what's been going on the streets of East Jerusalem. 91 people wounded thus far. Palestinians say they're also angry at other recent actions by Netanyahu's government, including the reopening of a controversial synagogue. All right, I want you to keep that in mind as you watch these pictures and as I steer the story back to us, back to this country. I want you to understand now the story behind the story. You know about the blow-up between the Israelis and Washington recently, right? Vice President Joe Biden, there to visit, there to promote peace. What happens? The Israelis announced a new settlement that was bound to spark outrage, and they did it while Biden was still there. In case you haven't heard, this is what folks in the White House are saying in public about that.
And this was an affront, it was an insult, but most importantly, it undermined this very fragile effort to bring peace to that region.
So this is now where this whole thing started. Biden's trip to Israel, right? Well, there's an explosive report that's now circulating today that says the problem actually goes much deeper than this. I'm going to read you part of this report now. This is from a website of a very respected publication. It's called Foreign Policy. The writer is author Mark Perry. He's going to be joining me, by the way. We've reached out to him. He's going to be joining us here in the next hour. But in the meantime, let me tell you what he's written about. Follow with me, if you would, here, Robert. This is fascinating. On January 16th, a team of senior military officers from the U.S. Central Command arrived at the Pentagon to brief Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Admiral Michael Mullen on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The team had been dispatched by CENTCOM Commander General David Petraeus to underline his growing worries at the lack of progress in resolving this issue. The 33-slide, 45-minute PowerPoint briefing stunned Mullen. The briefers reported that there was a growing perception among Arab leaders that the U.S. was incapable of standing up to Israel. These are U.S. military officials who are talking about Israel's policies affecting our military. I'll read on. Let's go down here, Robert. The January Mullen briefing was unprecedented. No previous CENTCOM commander had ever expressed himself on what is essentially a political issue. The Mullen briefing, Perry writes, hit the White House like a bombshell. The Obama administration decided it would redouble its efforts. And maybe the most important line down here. Look at this. David Petraeus sent a briefing team to the Pentagon with a stark warning. America's relationship with Israel is important, but not as important as the lives of American soldiers. Joining me now is my colleague who's had a lot of experience around the world covering stories like this. Jim Clancy, what do you make of that article written by Mark Perry, who incidentally we should disclose has ties to Palestinians.
Well, he worked for the Palestinian Authority as an advisor.
But this is not what he's saying.
But he's not doing that anymore.
He's not.
No.
But this is not what he's saying. He's reporting what happened in that meeting between these top U.S. military officials.
He's a top flight journalist.
He is.
Yes. And, you know, he doesn't source it, which makes me a little uncomfortable, but at the same time, boy, he's not somebody that's very often wrong, and obviously these aren't the kinds of leaks that you can source very easily without burning your sources.
We've known for a long time that there are people in the U.S. government that have warned administrations, hey, be careful, don't play just one side, because then you're going to make the Arab countries mad. But what makes us different is we now have troops in that part of the world. And if I'm hearing these guys correctly, Petraeus and Mullen and others, what they're saying is if Israel doesn't watch themselves, they're going to endanger the lives of our troops that are already there in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
The reality that David Petraeus, as military commander, sees here, Rick, is that al-Qaeda is using the Israeli-Palestinian dispute as a means of advancing their recruitment procedures, the enthusiasm that people have. Every time a scene like this is shown, they can say, we're the ones that stand up for that. This is what the Americans have year after year endorsed. And you know, you're right. Mark Perry, General Petraeus are hardly alone in all of this.
Yeah.
You know, down at
So there's other people who are reporting that there's a problem. Well, as a matter of fact, I think I have something I can share with you from today. Let me share you this. This was Petraeus today. He was testifying on a Senate hearing where he was being asked about this information. He says, again, Israeli-Palestinian tensions often flare into violence and large-scale armed confrontations. The conflict foments anti-American sentiment due to a perception of U.S. favoritism for Israel. Al-Qaeda and other militant groups exploit that anger to mobilize support. This isn't Jim Clancy saying this. This is Petraeus today testifying.
It's not just a perception. Let me give you a flash brief here. From CNN International. Take a look at this. These are two top-notch analysts.
You know, this American-Israeli situation is a crisis that's been in the making for several decades. At some point, the United States has to decide whether it has an independent policy in the Middle East that reflects American national interests, or the U.S. simply, as it has for the last 30 years or so, more or less reflects what the Israelis believe, or the right wing in Israel believes is in the best interest of Israel, and is implemented mainly through very powerful and effective pro-Israeli lobby groups in Washington.
What President Obama is doing or trying to do is very much in Israel's interest. He's trying to push a two-state solution that will prevent Israel from ultimately becoming an apartheid state. And the groups in the United States and Israel that are now attacking the administration don't have a long-term plan. It seems to me the only way you avoid the apartheid outcome is to get a two-state solution. And having Israel continue to build settlements is contrary to that particular goal.
All right, now you look at that, what he had to say, and he's really being very clear about it. That is, this isn't even in Israel's interest here. The U.S. is going to be tested. Will it stand up or not? We're going to find out. We're going to find out next week when Hillary Clinton goes to AIPAC. Now, AIPAC is the Israeli lobby, but really it represents the hard right wing that is standing in the way of any progress in these proximity talks.
This is interesting because, I mean, as a journalist, what I'm looking for is there a storyline here? As you hear Mark Perry write it, they had this briefing with CENTCOM officials and Mullen and General Petraeus. Then after that, Biden goes to the Middle East. He meets with the Israelis. And then, interesting, because Perry goes on to write, did Obama, the president, get together with Biden, the vice president, and say, okay, we have to double down on this now? He writes, and I'll read you this part, and I swear I'll stop reading to you. I don't want to sit here and be reading on the air. The vice president told his Israeli hosts that since many people in the Muslim world perceived a connection between Israel's actions and U.S. policy, now this is Biden talking to the Israelis, any decision about construction that undermines Palestinian rights in East Jerusalem could have an impact on the personal safety of American troops fighting against Islamic terrorism. It seems to me, and I think that's why this is a big news story today, this is a constant message that basically has many steps, and we're continuing to follow it along the way. A message I've never heard before from the United States.
Not from the U.S. military, not from someone that high up saying the political leaders have to get their act together to support the troops. And Perry makes another great point. You know, the Israeli lobby is powerful, like the gun lobby is powerful, the attorney's lobby is powerful, but the most powerful lobby, if you will, in all of Washington is the U.S. military. The American people aren't going to stand for a situation. When they hear this is happening, they're going to stand up.
One final question. How much does this elevate the heat on Benjamin Netanyahu, who I understand from reading periodicals inside Israel is already getting a lot of heat from Israelis?
He's getting heat from Israelis, but you know what? I think he perceives, another analyst told me, Loretta Napoleoni says, he perceives Barack Obama as weak, possibly only a one-term president. And he's prepared to risk all to stand up to him. Remember, it's his own domestic right-wing political support. The settlers swept him into office. He needs to support them. And there's that factor here, too.
This is a heck of a story.
Who's going to blink first? That's the big question.
It's a heck of a story. And with Petraeus now, chiming in and saying, look, whatever you guys do, just be damn careful you don't get my guys hurt. And I think that's what Petraeus is saying.
Well, from the American viewpoint, that's issue number one.
Wow. All right. Hey, thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Appreciate you making time to come down here and join us. Take a look at this.
As Speaker Pelosi put it, nobody wants to vote for the Senate bill.